Guys, welcome back. So for today's tutorial, I am going to talk to you about enhancing on the eyes as well as any makeup or shadows or highlights that you want to enhance on. This will work as well for those little areas. Please do bear with me. I do have a little bit of a cold and I'm going to try not to cough throughout the tutorial, but I hope you take something away from this tutorial as well. This is an image of my lovely daughter. And we are going to start by zooming into the image just to kind of get more focus on the eyes, and I can show you guys what I'm going to be doing. Okay, I really love the way the catch light caught right here in her eyes, and I'm going to enhance that by going down here to my layers, and I'm going to pick a curves layer. Under the curves layer, I am going to bring up the highlights, a little bit more of the exposure, and drop down on some of the blacks. That did affect the entire image, but we're going to change that by clicking on our white layer mask, hitting Control I. Now if you're working on a Mac, you'll want to hit Command I. Now I'm going to go over to my brush, click on my brush tool, and make sure it's selected on my white color. Then I'm going to go set my brush size just for the size that I need it for this little trick. I think I'm going to drop my opacity down to 75. You can also change your opacity on the layer itself, but I'm going to change it just a little bit to 75 for right now and see how that looks. Now I'm going to take my white brush and just brush in and pop it right in there into the little catch lights where I want it to affect. Now that did just a bit too much, so I'm going to drop down my opacity to about an 80. I think that looks pretty good. This image I am going to make it really dramatic and really pop and stand out. You don't have to make your images that dramatic. You can always drop down any layer that you want to, leave any of these steps out that you want to. I'm just really intensifying this just to show you guys the effects that you can do with your image. Now what I want to do too is I'm going to name this layer, and I'm going to name it Catch Light. Just so I know, because I'm going to have so many different layers going on here today. That way I can keep track of which layer I have and I'm working on. How you can change the titles of your layers is just by clicking on the layer itself, by doing a double click, and then you can change whatever you want to name it. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to bring back some sharpness in her eyes and make that really stand out as well. I'm going to do that by clicking on my background, right click, and I'm going to duplicate this layer. Now I'm going to go up to my filters. I'm going to go down to Other and High Pass. I think 20 pixels is a good starting point, and I actually might go ahead and boost that up just a little bit more, maybe 25. That's really intense, and it's going to really kind of make some of those details pop out a little bit. But I'm really liking that effect. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to change this layer out of normal and go to soft light. Now what that did, that's going to affect the entire layer or the entire image itself. Here, let me zoom out and I'm going to show you. I'm going to click it off and then back on. It really brought back in the details and things, and I don't want to affect the entire image. So I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to do the same thing, Control I or Command I. I'm going to zoom into my image again. Pick my brush, make sure it's set to white. I've got it at 75. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm just going to go in here and brush the areas that I want to really intensify. I think I also want to intensify some of the eyelashes. This image wasn't super sharp focus on the eyes. It did catch it in some spots, but I think it fell a little short around her nose and on her hair a little bit more. I'm going to drop my opacity down, drop my brush size down, and just go in here and touch on her eyelashes as well, just to bring back a little bit more details in her eyelashes. Like I said, this is all about preference and how you want your image to look. Turn it off and back on just to kind of show you guys how it looks. Now I'm going to name this layer, and I'm going to name this one Details. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you guys how I change the color of the eyes. You can do it a couple different ways. The way I like to do it is I use a curves layer. I'm going to click back onto my background, open up a new curves layer, and I'm going to go up to my RGB. RGB, you can change different layer or different colors as far as how you want your image to look. And I'm going to start off with the red. Now if you pull up on the reds, it's going to bring in more reds. If you pull down, it's going to bring in the cyans. I think I'm going to pull up just a hair on the reds, not too much, because I really like how it's really brown in here. I think I'm going to try to darken that too and see how that looks. Now I'm going to go into my green. I'm going to pull up on my greens just a little bit. Maybe a little bit on the highlight end. I like the way that one looks. Okay, now I'm going to go down to my blue. And I'm going to, I think I'm going to drop it down. I think that's, yeah, I like the way that looks. It's all about preference. You can bring the blues all the way up. You can bring them down. Maybe I'll bring more blue in. The other way that you can change the eye color is by clicking down on your adjustment layers and going up to hue and saturation. I just like this way a little bit better. It's just like I said, it's all about preference. Now I'm just going to add that just to the eyes and get it off of the rest of the image by once again clicking on the white layer mask, Control I or Command I. I'm going to make sure my white brush is set. I've got it set about 50%. I'm going to jump that up to about 75. See how that looks. And you don't have to do the entire eye. You can just do little sections of the eye. Just kind of pop it in there a little bit. If you want to go around the edges. I'm going to turn that off and turn that back on just to show you guys the effect that that did. I'm also going to change the name of this. I'm going to change this one to Eye Color. Now the next step I'm going to do, sometimes you don't get the eyes super sharp and focused. I'm going to show you another little trick I like to use sometimes to mimic the iris and the pupils and mimic that pop that they're coming back out. Okay, I'm going to go back down onto my background, open up a new curves layer, and this one I am going to boost it quite dramatically up on my exposure. Then I'm going to hit Control I or Command I. Select my white brush. I want to make sure it's at 100% for this step. My pixels, I'm going to be at 2%. And then I want to zoom in really close because this is going to be very detailed. And what I'm going to do is take my brush and brush in where these white highlighted areas are. I don't want to cover up too much right here in the dark areas, because what this effect is going to do is make it seem like your image was a little bit more sharper and in focus than it actually was. I'm getting a little sloppy with this, it looks like. I'm hoping it's going to do the same effect that I normally get. Now I know that looks really crazy right now, but the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. I sometimes don't use the duplicated layer, sometimes I do, but I like to duplicate it just in case I'm going to use it. I'm going to turn off the duplicated layer. I'm going to go back to this one. I'm also going to name this one. I'm going to name this one Pop. I'm going to click back onto my black layer, go up to Filter. I'm going to go down to Gaussian Blur. I think I'm going to, let me see. I think I'm going to start out at a 1.8 pixels on that one. And I'm also going to go back into my curves and maybe pull it in just a little bit. That's the great thing about curves and these different layers, is you can always go back over here and click back on the curves and do any adjustments after you've already done whatever you're looking for, wherever you brushed on. I'm going to play around a little bit with this. Also going to drop down the opacity on it. Let me do about 50%. I'm going to turn that effect off and then back on and show you guys what it did. It's not really intense, but it did pop it back in there just a bit. Don't think I'm going to need this extra curves layer, so I'm just going to click on that layer and drag it down to this little garbage can here, and that's how you can get rid of layers pretty simply without clicking right click. Okay, now I'm going to take all of these layers and I'm going to group those layers. How I'm going to group them is I am going to click the very top layer, hold my shift key, and then click the bottom layer. I'm going to right click, go up to group from layers, and click OK. Also going to name that group. I'm going to name that one Eyes. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and intensify on any shadows or highlights, as well as any of the makeup that's on her. Also, and I might add a little bit of makeup onto the sides of her cheek. She already has a really nice look on the side of her cheek, but I'm just going to kind of demonstrate for you guys. So I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to go up to curves. This look that I'm going to be going for is I'm going to be darkening. So I'm going to drop down the exposure just a bit, and I'm really focusing right here under her eyes as well as her eyelashes and her eyebrows. And I think that looks really nice. I'm going to make sure I have my white layer clicked. Control I or Command I. Go over to my brushes, make sure my white brush is selected. Then I'm going to boost up my size just a bit and zoom back in here. Drop my opacity down to say about 50%. That might be still too strong, but I'm just going to start out with 50%. I'm just going to trace along her eyes where I want to darken it up just a bit. And bring back the intensity of it. Probably going to get in there in the pupil area a little bit. I'm going to drop my exposure down, raise my brush up because I'm going to focus now on her eyebrows. Just kind of bring some of those colors back, or that darkening in there. I think also I'm going to hit some of these shadowy areas as well while I'm here. I like the way that looks. So that's the before, or I'm sorry, that's the before, and there's the after. I'm going to actually title this one Darken. Since I'm already on this, I'm going to use this same darken layer for my shadows. I'm just going to boost up the opacity though on my brush. I'm going to start out at 100% and see how that looks. It might be a little too intense. I'm just going to see how that looks though. It's just a little too much. Down about 80%. I'm just going to brush on these little dramatic areas that I want to kind of bring detail back into. Still think that's probably a little too much there. Go in some of the fur here, some of the little areas of her forehead and her hair. Just to kind of give it that dimension and that definition. Okay, now I'm going to turn that off and back on. I think I'm actually going to erase a little bit or use my black brush and pull off a little bit right in here. It's a little too much. Alright, I like the way that looks. So now I'm going to focus on some of her highlights. The highlights look amazing already in this, but I'm just going to kind of show you a little trick on how you can boost up some of those highlights in just little areas that you only want to boost them up in. What you're going to do is click on your background, open up a new layer, and it's going to be curves layer, and you're just going to pull your highlights up. You only want to pull them up to the areas that you want to be highlighting, and just sort of to the likings of how you want it to look. Click on your white layer mask, Control I or Command I. Make sure that you have your white brush selected. I've got it set at 45. That might be a little too intense, but I'm going to see how that looks. Just going to go in here and brush in some of these little highlight areas. Just kind of bring those back. Also going to add a little bit into her face, but I am going to drop down that exposure because I don't want it to be too dramatic. Okay, now I'm going to group these two layers together. Now I'm going to show you the before effect and the after effect. So this is the before, and this is the after. The before and the after. Like I said, this is really dramatic on the makeup and the eye intensity. You don't have to do every step. If you want to use just one of these steps for your images, that's completely fine. As long as you guys just take away something that you have learned from these tutorials, I am ever so grateful for that. Thanks again, guys, for watching. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, I'll talk to you guys later.